Welcome back to the show. Today's theme is called making waves. Making waves. And you're going to think, John, what are you talking about making waves? You're talking about surfing. You're talking about going to the beach. Now, the big picture today is making a difference in people's lives in ways that they may not even understand at the moment. I want to share several stories with you on this show that I hope by the end of the show you're going to say, you know, John, maybe I need to start looking at opportunities in my life where I can make waves, good waves, in other people's lives. Let me just share several stories. A lady by the name of Masami Sato, the founder of B1G1, was visiting Costa Rica when she found herself in a bad situation. Her credit cards and bank accounts were not working abroad, and she only had $5 to her name. It was strangers who came to her rescue to get her home. I had no money, no way to get money, and I didn't know anybody in the country. I only knew basic Spanish, and the only possession I had was a return ticket to Guatemala in 2 weeks. Back then, there was no such thing as mobile phones, and even email was very limited at some internet cafes that charged heaps for very slow connection. I thought to myself, staying in the city of San Jose would be dangerous. If I went to a countryside, maybe I would find kind people. With my remaining coins, if I tried, so she went to a terminal and found the countryside that cost almost exact the same amount. So about 4 or 5 hours later, I arrived in Santa Rosa. It was pitch black in the middle of the night. There were no street lights, and it was very rural, very country. You could see some houses in the distance, so I walked toward the houses. I went knocking door to door, explaining with my very poor Spanish that as I was Japanese and I was in Costa Rica with no money, but I needed to stay here for 2 more weeks before I could get back. I can cook and clean and look after your kids. I can do anything. Just give me a job. Everybody replied, oh my gosh, but we are so poor. We have no space and no extra food. Maybe you can try the next family. And they'd point me to the next house. Finally, I arrived at a Chinese restaurant. The owner of the restaurant was incredibly kind. She heard my story and really empathized. She said that her son went to Europe many years ago and had a similar experience. At that time, some other people were very kind to him, and she remembered how warm they made him feel and how it made her feel as a mama. She invited me in, gave me food, and called the Red Cross to come rescue me. I spent my remaining days in Costa Rica with the head of the Red Cross. I've traveled all over the world and been to over 50 countries, but this was one of the best trips, the best 2 weeks I have ever experienced in my entire life. At first, I felt guilty and stupid for not traveling with a clear plan, but then I realized that when you're in a position to be able to receive, it actually makes people feel better. Let me share those words again. Then I realized that when you're in a position to be able to receive, it actually makes people feel happier. Another thing I learned, that when people didn't have much, they could still lead a happy life. They could still smile and be kind, and being able to receive kindness is a gift for other people as well. And kindness really inspires more kindness that makes ripples, that makes waves. Let me share a story. Several years ago, a friend of mine and I shared office space. And 95% of the time, when we would go to lunch together, I would pay. Not because that he couldn't at all, but that's who I am. So one day we went to lunch and we're sitting across from each other, and he insisted on paying for lunch that day. And I was kind of taken back by it because I had 95% of the time paid for lunch. And he said some words to me that still ring in my head quite often. And he said, John, you have no problem giving, but you have a big problem receiving. At that time, we're talking several years ago now, I was kind of thrown back because I had never heard those words come out of anybody's mouth toward me, that John has a problem receiving. I have no problem giving. I give all day long. I share and a whole bunch of stuff I do for other folks all the time. But receiving at that point in my life, I never thought about that as being difficult. So what he did was he paid for lunch that time and many other times after that. As a result, his kindness, listen, his kindness was making waves and is still making waves in my life. Today, as I tape this show, he and his wife are coaches for high school basketball kids who may not be able to get into a college because of certain things in their lives, but as a result of sports, they were and are able to get into colleges. So they are making waves. I'm asking you today to think about the waves that you can make in other people's lives as a result of your simple but consistent acts of kindness. You're going to say, John, simple acts of kindness. I don't have a lot of money. I'm not a billionaire. I don't have, tons of influence in the world. But you know what? In my life, you don't need to have a ton of influence in the world in order to make a big difference in people's lives. Let me share another story with you. Cheryl Rice listened to that little voice that sometimes calls when you see someone in need, but you're really not sure what to do. Instead of ignoring it out of fear, she took a leap of faith that helped her lead down an important path. I was standing in the checkout line behind a woman who looked to be in her 60s. When it was her turn to pay, the cashier greeted her by name and asked her how she was doing. The woman looked down and shook her head and said, "Not so good. My husband just lost his job and my son is up to his old tricks again. But the truth is, I don't know how I'm going to get through the holidays," because she had just given the cashier her food stamps. My heart ached. I wanted to help but didn't know how. Should I offer to pay for her groceries? Ask for her husband's resume? I did nothing. Yet, as the woman left the store and I walked into the parking lot, I spotted the woman returning her shopping cart. And I remembered something in my purse that could help her in a different but hopefully profound way. It wasn't a handful of cash or a lead on a job for her husband, but maybe, just maybe, it would make her life better. "Excuse me," I said, my voice trembling a bit. "I couldn't help overhearing what you said to the cashier. It sounds like you're going through a really hard time right now. I'm really sorry, but I'd like to give you something." As I handed her a business-sized card, when the woman read the card's only 2 words, she began to cry. And through her tears, she said, "You have no idea how much this means to me." I was a little startled by her reply. Having never done anything like this before, I hadn't anticipated the reaction I might receive. All I could think to respond was, "Oh my, would it be okay to give you a hug?" So after we embraced, I walked back to my car and began to cry too. The words on the card, the 2 words on the card were, "You matter. You matter." A few weeks later, a colleague gave me the same card as encouragement for a project I was working on. When I read the card, I felt a warm glow spread inside me. Deeply touched, I came home and ordered my own box of You Matter cards and started sharing them too. You see, you don't have to have a ton of money in order to make a difference in somebody's life. Let me share another very personal story. In February of 1998, my wife and I traveled to St. Petersburg, Russia. Let me give you a little bit more backstory. We got married in 1988, in April of 88, and starting in 1989, we started trying to have children. Well, biological children never came. So in 1998, February 1998, we traveled to Russia to adopt a boy and a girl. So we're overseas in our daughter's orphanage, our first daughter's orphanage, and my wife was helping her get prepared to leave and getting her coat on her. And I can remember walking down one of the halls, and in this room that was probably about the size of a large bathroom were, I'm going to guesstimate, 8 or 10 or 12 little kids. And I was getting ready to leave. And it was cold. It was very cold during that time of year there. And all of a sudden, the kids started walking around me and kind of enveloping me in their Russian language that I didn't understand a whole lot of at the time. And I can remember just as clearly that it happened just yesterday, is that most of them were hollering, "Papa, Papa," or "Daddy, Daddy." They wanted to go home also, like our oldest daughter was about to leave the orphanage forever that day. And that experience, that memory, has stuck with me for such a long time that, as some of you know, we went back and adopted 4 more kids. We adopted a boy and a girl on that trip, and we adopted 4 more. Partly as a result of feeling these kids hanging on me, wanting me to take them home too. What I'm saying is, you don't necessarily need to have a ton of assets in order to make a difference in people's lives. I had a manager one time named John McGinnis, and I've shared this on other episodes, but I think it's important to share again on this show. And one day I came in from my job. I was in insurance sales at the time, and I was frustrated. I was in my early 20s, and I walked into, his name's also John, John's office, and I was kind of whining and complaining and being frustrated about parts of the job that were driving me nuts. And he said, "John, liser." Liser. I said, "What are you talking about, liser?" L-I-S-O-R, liser. I said, "John, is that a foreign language? Is that something in Latin?" I didn't know what he was talking about. He said, "No, John, liser stands for lacking in sense or reason, lacking in sense or reason. That means there are people in your life and my life that lack in sense or reason. So John, why are you getting upset at the actions of other people when they're the ones that are lacking in sense or reason?" Now, we're talking 30-some years ago, and John's words of wisdom still ring true in my mind, and then I've passed on his wisdom to thousands of other people over the years. You see, John McGinnis is still making ripples, still making waves in my life, which then those waves are extended through me to the lives of other people. How many times haven't you been coached, been taught by a grandparent that now you have passed along their information, their wisdom to your family? I can remember when my mom's mom, Teresa Ford, was alive. I was in my teens one day, and we were spending the day together. And we were out on the sidewalk, and we were walking down the sidewalk, and I didn't know any better. She walked on the street side, and I walked on the inside of the sidewalk, and she corrected me. She grabbed my arm and turned me around, and then I was walking on the street side of the sidewalk, and she was walking on the inside. She says, "John, this is how a gentleman walks a lady down the sidewalk." That is, I was going to protect my grandmother in case there was a car that was going to come up. I wasn't exposed my grandmother to the street. We're talking 40-some years ago, and I'm still remembering my grandmother's words of wisdom. What I'm asking you today is to think about the opportunities in your own life that you can make a difference in people's lives, that you can literally make waves in their lives in ways that you cannot even imagine. There's an ancient story about a group of people that got together and kind of pulled their funds together to make a difference in the community. I've been doing some homework on an organization that builds homes for the poor. And they rally the strengths, they rally the talents of other people to help them build homes for hurting families. I can remember when we built our house in 2006. The contractor didn't fix everything. He didn't build everything. He brought all these subcontractors in and all these specialists in order to create the home that they built for us. What I'm saying is there are people in your life that you can leverage, that you can bring in their strengths, that can make waves in your life, that can be transferred from you, if you're smart and caring, to other people in the world that can dramatically change the other folks in your life. So if you think about it, if you really look back at your own life, there are people in your life that have made good waves, and there's people that have made some bad waves in your life. Let me share another quick story. Way back in the 6th grade, when I was younger and even into adulthood, I had a really bad stutter. I was really afraid and lived my life in fear quite a bit. And I had one really good friend. His name was Ken. I'm not going to say his last name. So Ken and I were pretty tight. Ken at that time had braces. He had glasses. I didn't have glasses back then. And we were as close as we could get. He was very shy and awkward, and I was very shy and awkward. And then one day I came to lunch at the school, and Ken was sitting in my seat. Now we're talking, there's no reserved seats in that school for lunch, but he was sitting in my seat, the seat that I would always sit in the corner of the table closest to the door. That's where I would sit. So I was a little upset is probably not the right word, but I was annoyed, right? So there was this other kid who saw that I was annoyed, and he chose to blow that annoyance up. So he started talking trash to me to talk trash to my best friend Ken. Make a very long and embarrassing story short, that devolved into a situation that got me kicked out of school for a few days because I did something that was really stupid as a result of being manipulated and allowing somebody else to get into my head to get me to do things that I knew that I shouldn't have done at all, ever. This other kid was making waves, which then produced a counterbalance, a counter-reaction to some things that I was doing that was not so ethical. There's another story I want to share, a much, much, much older story about a guy who got into some trouble. And he was in the middle of a life change. He had gone down a certain path for a lot of years, and he decided through really no intelligence of his own, no planning on his own, to do a 180, to do something completely different in his life. But he had established such a routine and such a reputation that it was very hard for him to go from heading this way to head that way, because he had, again, built a reputation that was regional. Everybody knew who he was, what he did, and how he did it. And then he came to and by the way, this guy was very intimidating. In fact, he was violent. He hurt a lot of people, and he was in charge of other people hurting other people. So he had a reputation that was not so good. So one day, the news spread that this guy decided to do a 180, but right around that time he got sick. I'm not going to get into the details of how or what the illness was, but he was pretty sick. So this other guy decided that he really that he felt like he should go see this guy. But he had a reputation, you see, that was not very kind. In fact, it wasn't kind at all. It was violent. It was evil. It was manipulative. It was just the opposite of what this other guy was. But he really felt like he should go and kind of help this formerly evil guy that had a reputation of evil that the stories were saying that he turned around and now he's focusing on doing good things. But you know how stories are, and wives' tales and rumor, and they didn't even have Facebook back then, obviously. So we're talking a long time ago, right? So this guy, he dawdled on it just a little bit, and then he decided to go take a chance and go knock on the door of where this formerly evil guy was staying, and decided to take a chance. He knocked on the door, and the people he was staying with let him in the house. And make even a longer story short, this guy that was afraid of approaching this guy that the news in the region was saying that he had done a 180 and was now good instead of being bad, he decided to try to make a difference and help this formerly evil guy. Longer story short, those two became best buds as a result of the afraid guy having the courage to approach a guy with a reputation that wasn't so good. I'm wondering how many times you in your own life, I know it's happened to me more than a few times, where we've been intimidated about approaching people that we probably wouldn't invite over to our house for dinner. When I would suggest to you that a good percentage of the people that maybe you would not invite to your house for dinner are influential in their own way, and also, as John Maxwell taught me years ago, that hurting people hurt people. Again, hurting people hurt people. So when you see people in your own life that are making not so nice waves, that are being probably, maybe not evil, but negative. Maybe they're in the office and they're not being so kind in the office. Maybe they're nasty in the lunchroom. Maybe the teacher's barking at the kids more times than they need to be barking at the kids. Just remember, hurting people hurt people, because hurting people make waves that sometimes people that are not hurt don't make waves. So think about that in your own life. Think about all the times you have made waves in the lives of other people as a result of your pain, as a result of your frustration, as a result of your disappointment. You have made negative waves in the lives of other people. Instead of dealing with that independently or with a bunch of peers that get it, because I would suggest to you that most of the people in your life don't understand the pain that you're going through. Most of the people in your life don't understand your history because they haven't walked in your shoes. They haven't. But if you and I choose to look for people and or groups that have walked in similar sets of shoes, you're then able to open up and share with these people. And guess what? Their journey, their experience can impact you in a way that can dramatically change your life in a really powerful way. But the majority of people around you won't get it. So what I'm asking you to do, among several things in this episode here today, is to leverage the situations in your life whereby you can make waves in other people's lives. The older I get, and the more influence that I've been having in many parts of the world, I'm really trying to be extremely cautious. I don't always succeed because I'm very, very human. But I have to understand that every little thing that I say and or do is then magnified dramatically. Let me share that in maybe a different way. You know, there are some people that you've worked with, maybe some people who live in your home, that will take a small mistake that you have made and make that a model, but blow it up 10 or 20 or 30 times. But they ignore all the good habits you have. They ignore all the good things. They ignore all the wonderful things you do for mankind. They ignore that, but they take the small mistake and blow it up to be something big, and then they model it and create even a bigger monster from your mistakes. So what I'm asking you to do in maybe a kind of strange way is that you and I, me too, I'm talking to me too very much here today, is that you need to be very cautious of how you react to certain stimuli in your own life. One author said something to the effect of there's a space between a stimulus and a response. Again, there's a space between the stimulus and the response. Sometimes in my life, probably in your life, there was no space. There was a stimulus and there was a response. Sometimes the older you get, the wider that gap gets to be. So I'm asking you to think about the times today and next week and maybe last week that you've been faced with the opportunity to make a decision or to react in a certain way. I'm asking you on this episode to think about the waves that you're going to make as a result of the actions that you're thinking about taking, or the words that you're going to be that you want to share, or the post that you want to put out there online. There's been many a time, and probably with you too, that I've posted something online, and before I hit the enter button to post it, I said, you know what, this is not going to go well. Because somebody's going to take this and twist it or manipulate it or take it out of context, or they're going to see a side of me that maybe I don't want them to see because I'm struggling that day. I'm asking you, reminding you today that everything you do, everything you say, every place you go, everything you eat makes waves. So hope an idea or two, a story or two in this episode will remind you from time to time that everything you say and do and think about and contemplate and want to do and bark at somebody or encourage somebody, all of it makes waves in ways that you cannot even imagine. My name is John Carver. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back real soon.